Okay, so imagine this, right? You're a cook
Yeah.
on a train back in the early 1900s,
Yeah.
and you've got all these cantaloupes
Yeah.
that are about to go bad.
Oh, no.
Like, what do?
Yeah,
You
wow.
just toss them. Well, not if you're the clever cook behind today's deep dive. You get creative and you whip up something called cantaloupe cream pie.
Wow.
I know, right? It's a southern dessert, so unique you might not have even heard of it.
That's fascinating. It really speaks to the heart of Southern baking, I think,
Hmm.
that resourcefulness,
Yeah.
coming from a history of, well, sometimes having to make do with less. We often picture the South,
Right.
you know, all romantic with grand plantations and elegant parties. But the reality of Southern baking
Yeah.
often lies in using what you have,
Yeah.
not letting anything go to waste.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what we're going to be uncovering today as we dive into Baking in the American South by Anne Byrne.
It's not just a cookbook. It's like a journey through time, filled with stories and history and these little aha moments that completely change how you see Southern food.
I agree. And I think what's really interesting for our listeners today
Mm-hmm.
is whether you grew up with the smell of cornbread baking in your grandma's kitchen,
Yeah.
or you're just now starting to discover the world of Southern flavors. I think
Yeah.
understanding the why behind these recipes, it really gives you a whole new appreciation for this culinary tradition.
Right, because it's anything but simple.
Yeah.
And let's just debunk a myth right away, right?
Hmm.
When we think the South, we often think abundance, overflowing tables, huge fields.
Hmm.
But as Anne Burns shows us, Southern baking is really rooted in resourcefulness.
It really is.
It's about taking what the land provides and making it into food, making it into flavor, and, even creating a sense of community.
Yeah, and a great example of that is cornbread. It wasn't just some side dish.
No.
I mean, this was a lifeline. Corn was easy to grow. You could grind it locally, and it fed people from all walks of life,
Right.
Rich and poor alike.
Right.
It really shows that connection between Southern baking and the land.
I love that. And, speaking of these recipes that have been passed down for generations, I'm always so fascinated by those, like, kind of vague measurements.
No, yeah.
A teacup of flour, a pinch of salt.
Right, right.
I like things to be pretty precise in the kitchen. So I always wonder, how did Southern cooks make sure things turned out consistently with those kinds of instructions?
Well, that's what's so interesting. That lack of exact measurements probably meant that each family's recipes had their own little twists.
Oh,
So
interesting.
they became these unique traditions
Practice, cool.
specific to each household.
Right.
So it wasn't just about making the same recipe, it was about adding your own personal touch.
That's a really beautiful way to look at it. And luckily for those of us who like things a little more precise, Anne Byrne actually includes modern measurements
Yeah.
alongside those charming old-fashioned ones. So we get that authenticity and the consistency we're used to today.
Exactly. It's the best of both worlds.
Right. And then there's the instructions about the oven, which can be almost as confusing as those measurements.
I know.
Like slow oven or quick oven.
Yeah.
And I'm always like, what temperature is that? Exactly.
Right.
But don't worry, Anne Byrne has got us covered. She's got this great conversion chart for modern kitchens, and she explains how those old wood-fired ovens, where they're changing temperatures, were actually key to making those amazing Southern biscuits we all love.
They really were.
And if slow ovens and quick ovens sound interesting, wait till you hear about falling ovens and cold ovens.
Yeah, I know.
The first time I saw those terms, I thought I was reading something wrong.
Right.
Turns out, these are actual techniques that have been used for generations by Southern bakers.
Right.
It's amazing.
So with a falling oven, you start the recipe at a high temperature, and then you gradually turn the heat down. It's kind of like mimicking how a wood-fired oven cools down slowly, and that gives you this beautiful brown crust and a soft inside.
Interesting.
And then there's the cold oven method. Now get this. You put the batter in a cold oven.
Well,
Yeah, and then you turn it on.
wow.
This actually came about during the 1930s
Okay.
as a way to save gas, but it gives you this really dense, moist texture, especially in cakes.
That's incredible. I mean, these techniques really show how resourceful and creative Southern cooks have always been. They weren't just following recipes. They were like innovating,
Absolutely.
pushing the boundaries in the kitchen. And that brings us to another fascinating part of this story, story that's like intertwined with the history of the South. Rice.
Rice is so much more than just an ingredient in Southern baking.
Mm-hmm.
It really tells a story of resilience and cultural fusion. Enslaved Africans, when they were brought to South Carolina, they brought with them this expertise in growing and cooking rice. And it totally changed the food of that region. And we still see that legacy today. From those basic rice breads and crunchy rice croquettes,
Yeah.
all the way to Hoppin' John, that dish with rice and black-eyed peas and pork. That's all about good luck for the new year.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites.
It's a powerful reminder that the story of Southern baking is also the story of the people who created it.
Right. And it's amazing how a single ingredient can have so much history, so much meaning attached to it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting how sometimes those stories take us down unexpected paths.
Yeah.
Like the connection between Southern baking and federal programs to add vitamins and minerals to food.
It may seem like a strange connection at first, but
It
it's
does.
actually pretty profound. You see, the South relied a lot on corn,
Yeah.
especially in poorer communities, and that led to a lot of people not getting enough niacin, which caused this awful disease called pellagra.
And that was a huge health problem back then.
It was, and it took a while for people to realize that it was connected to what they were eating.
That's right. It was figuring out that link between corn-based diets and pellagra that got scientists and the government to start adding important vitamins and minerals to grains, including niacin.
Exactly.
And that public health initiative, which started because of a problem in the South, still affects the food we eat today,
That's right.
making sure that the grains we eat are full of nutrients. It's amazing,
Uh-huh.
to think that even something as simple as baking
Yeah.
can have such a big impact on things like public health and social justice and scientific progress.
It really is.
And sometimes those connections lead us straight to delicious desserts.
Have you ever thought about where key lime pie came from? I mean, I just always assumed it had always been around.
It's actually a pretty recent invention,
Oh, wow.
and the story is as tangy and interesting as the pie itself. So picture the Florida Keys.
Okay.
Fresh milk was hard to come by there.
Right.
So canned milk, especially the sweetened condensed kind, became super important.
Makes sense with the climate and everything. Right. So then there's this businessman who bought up a ton of sweetened condensed milk.
Oh, wait.
And it said that his cook, with all this extra canned milk, just got creative and came up with the very first key lime pie.
Wow, that's a great story. Resourcefulness and creativity, and the
Yeah.
result is this amazing dessert that we still love today.
Absolutely. And speaking of resourcefulness,
Mm.
let's go back to that train cook we talked about,
Yeah.
the one with all those ripe cantaloupes. He created a pie that's just as delicious, but maybe not as well known outside of the South cantaloupe cream pie.
You know what? I've never actually had cantaloupe cream pie, but now I'm really curious.
It's so good.
It's amazing how a simple problem, like having too much fruit, can lead to something so creative.
It really is. And that story about the train cook shows us something else that's really important.
What's that?
The role of railroads in shaping Southern cuisine.
Oh, yeah.
Railroads weren't just about transporting goods and people. They also influenced what was available to cooks,
Yeah.
leading to new recipes and new traditions.
I never thought about it that way. So,
That resourceful train cook really shows us how Southern baking was influenced by both practicality
yeah.
and the changing world around it.
It really is a reminder that even the most iconic dishes have a story to tell, a history that reveals the creativity and resourcefulness
Absolutely.
and all those cultural influences
Yeah.
that have shaped Southern baking into the rich and flavorful tradition we know and love today.
It truly is a fascinating journey. And as we kind of dig deeper into this world of resourceful cooks and all these amazing recipes, it's interesting to think about how measuring, like the way they measured ingredients, how that changed over time in Southern baking.
Yeah.
We talked about those kind of vague, charming measurements earlier.
Or a pinch of this, a handful of that.
Exactly. So how did Southern cooks go from that to the more, I guess you could say, standardized methods that we use today?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like, I imagine there was a point where those old ways, those traditions passed down, they met up with a modern world of recipes with exact measurements.
Right.
What do you think caused that shift?
Well, it was gradual, I think cookbooks played a big part in that. Cookbooks wanted to write down those recipes in a way that everyone could understand
Right.
and make them more accessible to more people. And then you had home economics classes,
Oh, yeah.
which started becoming popular in the early 1900s. They really emphasized, being precise, being consistent in your baking, and that introduced people to standardized measuring tools and techniques.
So it wasn't just about making recipes easier to follow. It was about connecting Southern baking to the, I guess, wider world of cooking,
Yeah.
making sure everyone was speaking the same language, so to speak.
Exactly. And as things like measuring cups and spoons became more common and more affordable,
Right.
that helps make home baking easier for, the average person.
Right. But even with those standard measurements, there's still that room for, like, putting your own spin on things.
Well, for sure.
There's still that personal touch in baking.
Absolutely. I mean, I've learned that in my own kitchen. Even when you follow a recipe perfectly, things can turn out a little different depending on your oven, the weather even, the quality of the ingredients.
Right. It's that mix of, like, science and art that makes baking so fascinating.
Exactly. And speaking of art, I think Southern bakers really shine when it comes to cakes.
Oh, yeah, they do.
And Byrne talks about how Southern cakes are more than just something sweet to eat.
Right.
They're expressions of creativity, of hospitality.
Hmm.
They often take center stage at celebrations, big or small.
They really do.
Mm.
There's just something about a Southern cake that feels so special. And the variety is incredible. You've got those simple but elegant pound cakes, the classic layer cakes,
Right.
and then these elaborate creations like Lane cake
Yeah.
with all those layers of pecans and that bourbon-soaked filling. And then there's hummingbird cake,
Yeah.
all tropical and delicious, with its
Yeah.
pineapple and banana and
I
pecans.
love hummingbird cake.
Each cake has its own story to tell, its own cultural meaning, too.
Yeah, for sure. Like Lane cake, it's said to have originated in Alabama in the late 1800s.
Oh, really?
And it became this symbol of Southern hospitality, of celebration.
Interesting.
And hummingbird cake is newer. It came about in the 1970s.
Oh, wow.
But it became super popular because of those vibrant flavors and its moist texture.
It's amazing how all these cakes, each with its own beginning, have become such a big part of Southern culture.
Mm. And it's not just about the cakes themselves, it's about the traditions that go with them.
Right.
Like writing down cake recipes,
Right.
often on those index cards,
Hmm.
passing them down through generations. They become these culinary treasures, like heirlooms, that
Yeah.
connect families and communities through the language of baking.
I love that. Those handwritten recipes,
Yeah.
stained with batter,
Right.
filled with memories.
Yeah,
It's like baking a piece of history.
exactly. And speaking of history, we can't forget about one of the most iconic Southern desserts, pecan pie.
Oh, yeah.
That buttery, nutty goodness, a true Southern original. It's deeply connected to the South's abundant pecan harvests.
Pecan pie is a Thanksgiving tradition in my family,
Mm-hmm.
but I've never really thought about where it came from. It just seems like it's always been there.
It does, doesn't it? While we don't know exactly where it came from, we do know that pecan pie as we know it today really came about in the late 1800s,
Okay.
probably because of corn syrup, that special ingredient that gives it that gooey texture.
Corn syrup. That's the magic that turns pecans and sugar
Yeah,
into that amazing caramel-like filling.
absolutely. And pecan pie isn't just a dessert. It's another symbol of Southern hospitality. It's that sweet, comforting treat that you see at holiday gatherings, family reunions, you name it.
It really is.
Oh,
And it's not just a Southern thing anymore either.
no, it's not.
People all over the world love pecan pie now.
I think it's those simple but delicious flavors that appeal to everyone. And speaking of universal appeal, we can't forget about another Southern staple. Biscuits.
Oh, biscuits.
From those fluffy buttermilk biscuits to flaky layered biscuits to those savory cheese biscuits, there's a biscuit out there for everyone.
It's true.
Biscuits are the quintessential Southern bread.
Mm.
Simple, versatile, and utterly irresistible. And the variety is amazing.
It is.
Buttermilk biscuits with that tangy flavor and tender crumb are a classic for a reason.
Yeah.
And layered biscuits, like those tall cat head
Oh, I
biscuits,
love those.
get their flaky texture from all that folding of butter or shortening into the dough.
Mm.
It's a process. And then there's cheese biscuits, which are fantastic for breakfast, brunch, or even dinner.
Yeah, they are.
They add that savory twist to this beloved bread. But no matter what kind of biscuit you're making, there are some basic things that are always important. Well, you got to use cold ingredients. That's key to getting those flaky layers. And you want to handle the dough gently so you don't develop too much gluten. That keeps them tender. And of course, baking at a high temperature gives you that quick rise and a nice golden brown crust.
And then there's the whole debate about kneading the dough or not.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Some people say a little kneading helps develop the gluten and makes a chewier biscuit,
Mm-hmm.
while others say just patting it into shape keeps it more tender and crumbly.
It really comes down to personal preference. But no matter how you do it, a well-made biscuit is like a work of art.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it's not just about the biscuit itself. It's about how you serve it.
Right.
All those delicious toppings.
Oh, yeah, with butter, honey, jam, gravy, you name it.
Mm-hmm. Piled high on a plate for breakfast or tucked into a picnic basket.
Mm.
Biscuits are more than bread. They're a symbol of Southern hospitality. That comfortable, familiar presence at any gathering.
And a reminder that sometimes the simplest things are the most delicious. Now, moving on from bread, let's talk about those comforting puddings we mentioned earlier.
Mm.
Banana pudding, especially, holds a special place in the hearts of Southerners.
It really does. Banana pudding is a classic for a reason, with those layers of vanilla wafers, bananas, and that fluffy meringue.
Mm.
It always makes me think of happy childhood memories and family get-togethers.
Yeah, it evokes that feeling of nostalgia and comfort.
It does.
And it's a relatively new invention.
Really?
It came about in the late 1800s thanks to those commercially made vanilla wafers and the fact that bananas became more available.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's another example of how technology and the ingredients that were available really shaped Southern baking.
Right, like who knew that the mass production of vanilla wafers and better ways to transport bananas
Right.
would lead to this beloved dessert?
It's amazing, isn't it? And over time, banana pudding became a staple at all kinds of gatherings, church socials, potlucks, family meals.
It's a dish that brings people together,
It does.
and it brings back those warm, fuzzy feelings.
And the variations are endless. Some people like a cooked custard base, while others go for a lighter whipped topping.
Right.
Some add nuts or crumbled cookies for extra texture and flavor.
Mm-hmm.
But no matter how you make it, banana pudding is just pure Southern comfort.
I feel like we could talk about all the ways to make banana pudding for hours.
We could. But let's shift gears a bit and talk about something that's often overlooked when we talk about Southern baking. Road food.
Road food?
Yeah, think about all those roadside restaurants and bakeries that you see all over the South.
Yeah.
They're serving up all sorts of delicious treats for people traveling through.
Oh, I see what you mean. Those classic diners with their sky-high pies
Yes.
and fluffy biscuits.
Right.
Those barbecue places with their smoky ribs and sweet potato pie.
So good.
And those little country stores with their jars of pickled peaches and homemade jams.
It's all coming back to me now, too.
It's like a flood of memories.
And don't forget about those gas stations with their surprisingly good fried chicken.
Oh, and the pecan logs?
Yes. Road food is a true reflection of the South's amazing culinary diversity
Mm-hmm.
and that deep tradition of hospitality.
Like those roadside stops are like little culinary embassies.
Yeah.
Offering a taste of Southern culture,
Yeah.
welcoming strangers with open arms,
Absolutely.
and a plate full of good food. It's about making every journey a little bit sweeter.
It really is.
It's fascinating how those everyday places, diners, gas stations, little country stores, play such a big role in preserving those Southern culinary traditions.
They really do. They're like hidden gems, often overlooked, but full of flavor and character.
Yeah.
And they remind us that sometimes the best culinary adventures are the ones you least expect.
So if you had to recommend like a few must-try road food treats for someone taking a culinary road trip through the South,
Okay.
what would you tell them to get?
That's a tough one. It depends on where they're going and what they like.
Right, of course.
But here are a few classics to get them started. First up, peach cobbler, a true taste of Southern summer.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine juicy peaches baked under a golden, buttery crust, served warm with a scoop of vanilla ice cream melting on top.
Peach cobbler is a must-have. It's like sunshine in every bite.
It is. And for something you can eat on the go, you gotta try a fried pie.
Oh, those are so good.
They come in all sorts of flavors: apple, peach, chocolate, pecan, each one with a crispy, flaky crust and a warm, gooey filling.
So good.
Best enjoyed fresh out of the fryer while they're still hot and bubbly.
Fried pies are just perfect. Sweet, savory, and so satisfying.
Absolutely. And of course, no road trip through the South is complete without a stop at a barbecue place for a slice of pecan pie.
Of course not.
Pecan pie is the ultimate Southern comfort food. It's perfect at the end of a meal or even after a long day of driving.
It really is. Best enjoyed with a cup of coffee, just savoring those Southern flavors and reflecting on your culinary journey.
Hey.
This is making me want to pack my bags and hit the road right now.
I know, me too.
All this talk of biscuits and fried pies and pecan pie.
It's making me hungry.
Me too.
Yeah.
Maybe we should take a break and grab a bite to eat before we continue our deep dive into Southern baking.
That's a great idea.
We'll be back soon to explore more of the stories and traditions and flavors that make Southern baking so special. We've been talking about all these amazing recipes and how clever Southern cooks are, and it's got me thinking about the role of community in all of this.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Community really is at the heart of Southern baking.
Yeah.
It's not just about the food, right? It's about that shared experience,
Mm-hmm.
the connections you make over a warm oven and a recipe.
It's like baking becomes this way of connecting with people, both the ones you're sharing the meal with and the ones who came before.
Exactly. And I think about those traditions, that revolve around baking in the South.
Oh, yeah.
Like church bake sales where everyone brings their best dish, the community cookbooks with all those generations of recipes, those family recipe swaps.
Oh, yeah, with those handwritten cards, all stained with batter and full of memories.
Yes. Those are like treasures passed down. It's all about that deep sense of community.
It's about so much more than just the food. It's about making memories, keeping those family ties strong, passing those traditions down.
It's about nurturing a sense of place through baking. And it's not just in small towns or rural areas either.
Right.
Even in cities, you see Southern baking bringing people together.
That's so true. I've lived in cities where those little neighborhood bakeries, they become like community hubs where people get together for coffee and a slice of cake, share stories.
Right. They connect with their neighbors.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you've got those community gardens that are popping up in cities.
Oh, yeah.
People growing their own fresh ingredients, often using them in those traditional Southern recipes. It's amazing how baking can bring people together no matter where they are.
It really shows how food can create a sense of belonging. And while we're talking about community and traditions, I think it's important to remember all the different cultures that have influenced Southern baking.
Absolutely. We've talked about how important African cuisine has been.
Right.
But the food of the South is like this amazing mix of so many different things. You can see the French influence in Louisiana, in those beignets and king cakes.
Oh, so good.
And in Texas, you see the German influence in things like kolaches and strudels.
Yeah, and we can't forget the Native American influence.
With that focus on corn and beans and squash.
Right. It's all over the South. It's like this incredible blend of flavors and techniques.
It is.
It really shows the history of the region and all the people who have contributed to its food.
And it reminds us that Southern baking is always evolving. It's a story that's still being written by the people who create and share it.
Well said. So, as we wrap up our deep dive into this fascinating world, what's one last thought you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I think I'd encourage everyone to really explore Southern baking. Don't be afraid to go beyond what you're used to.
Yeah.
Try a new recipe, visit a local bakery,
Right.
talk to someone who's been baking Southern treats for years.
Yeah.
You might be surprised by what you find and the connections you make along the way.
That's great advice. And remember, you don't have to be from the South to enjoy Southern baking.
That's right.
It's a culinary tradition that welcomes everyone.
It does.
So keep exploring, keep learning, and keep baking. And if you're looking for more deep dives into all sorts of fascinating topics, be sure to subscribe to The Deep Dive. We take your sources and turn them into these insightful, entertaining learning experiences
That we do.
that are curated just for you.